Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our third creator chat of the day. We have Chris Condon with us, the author of That Texas Blood. Chris, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
A pleasure. Before we begin, I did want to let people know that although this is an interview format, it is also open to questions from the audience. So please remember throughout that this is meant to be interactive and you can seed your questions in our text chat and then I will read them to Chris as we go. Now that that's out of the way, why don't we go ahead and get started with introductions? Chris Condon was born and raised in the small New Jersey town of Matukin. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Chris?
It's Metuchen.
Metuchen? Well, I just completely murdered that. I'm so sorry, Metuchen. Please forgive me.
I think they'll forgive you.
Oh, thank God. Metuchen is a stone's throw from the hustle and bustle of the behemoth that is New York City. Condon devoted himself to the cinema from an early age. In the second grade, he attempted to launch a remake of James Cameron's Titanic, but things soon fell apart. Chris, can you talk to us about this?
Yeah. So, I don't know why I thought I could do this, but I had already been planning this whole remake. I figured out, I figured I could get wood fairly easily. So I was
Sure,
going to
wood's
build it.
everywhere.
Yeah, I was going to build the deck of the Titanic on the recess school grounds. And I don't know how I was going to do it, but I thought I could do it. And somehow I knew that I could just do that and shoot the wide and it would be something else. But
Sure,
I
yeah.
figured so I was already casting people, but the thing that held me up was I couldn't figure out how to make working smokestacks. And so I just abandoned the whole thing.
Oh no. What about you guys didn't have those the white paper tubes from art class, all the newsprint paper.
Oh, I'm talking about I wanted life size. Like that's what
Oh,
I was
I can't
thinking.
help you
I
with
was thinking
that.
big. I was a second grader who thought big. Uh,
Yeah.
maybe too big.
No, I think I appreciate the inspiration. I
Mhm.
think that you dreaming big has brought you to great places. You're working with Jacob Phillips right now,
Mhm.
for instance, on that Texas Blood. Can you tell us a little bit about this newest series and also how does it relate to Titanic?
Well, it doesn't take place on a ship.
Shoot.
It doesn't take place on the ocean. It takes place in Texas, and really, that Texas Blood is about a fictional West Texas county called Ambrosia, and it's really about the place itself, but it's all that live there and bad stuff that tends to happen to them and around them. And we tend to run around with our sheriff, the lead, who's Joe Bob, who Jacob has wonderfully rendered with a bushy mustache and sort of a slight resemblance to Sam Elliott. But yeah, no, that's essentially our series. It's so we sort of it's a little bit more of a so every arc is different. Either it's going to be a different time period or a different story entirely, sort of driving towards something larger. I think so.
Yeah, I for people who may not have read the first volume, can they come into the second volume without that context, or do you
Mm-hmm.
recommend they read the first volume first?
Well, I recommend they read the first volume because I wrote it. No,
I think this is a great. Okay,
but
good. Yeah.
no, they do not have to read the second volume or the first volume in order to read the second volume. The second volume is really its own thing, which is the way that we had designed it in the first place. I like the idea of you having a richer experience if you've read more, but not having it be necessary. Reading, an instruction manual of like, oh, now I got to get to this point in volume two. I like that you get start over almost with a new volume. We're going to do the same thing with the next arc as well, which are coming back in May 2022 with.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm wondering how you as an author put together this town of Ambrose. How did you first sort of stumble upon this idea of or develop the idea of setting it in a place so far from you with people who are so far from you?
Yeah.
an age range, because you're also focusing on people who are older, and we don't see that a lot in comics, which I think is delightful.
Yeah. I Part of it is that my parents are older, so I grew up with an older sort of mindset in general. So my dad just turned 83.
Mhm.
My mom is 76. So just when I grew up in the 90s, I'm 30 years old. When I grew up in the 90s, I essentially feel like I grew up in the 50s, really, because everything that I was brought up with was what they figured that I would like. So I grew up watching things like Howdy Doody and things like Ed Sullivan Show tapes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I was brought up. So I was always sort of, they always like people always say like, oh, you have an old soul or whatever, but I just think that I was just born into the wrong era. But that sort of might have led to why I wrote about the characters that I wrote about. But I think a lot of it just comes down to observation and spending time in a real West Texas town called Fort Davis, which is essentially what our fictional place is based off of. Is this a place called Fort Davis, Marfa? If you've heard of Marfa, Texas, with the Marfa Lights, it's also based
Yeah.
off of that. So we're sort of shoving our world into that world, so it still exists, but we're somewhere in between. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's probably where it came from. I don't really know exactly. I wish I had a better answer to that.
No, I think it is a
But
good answer. I also had an old dad. So yeah, I had
yeah,
an old dad and a young mom, old dad, young mom. So yeah, it was a peculiar mixture when you're a kid growing up with older parents of like, I gotta get home and watch the Dick Van Dyke Show. And
yeah.
what are you doing for Halloween? Well, I'm gonna watch Bela Lugosi's Dracula with my mom. Well, okay, we'll be trick-or-treating.
Well, exactly. I mean, that was the thing for me, was that everybody was watching all the modern movies, and I was watching the modern movies too, but I was also watching things like, for example, I had a love of horror movies early on, and I didn't even see horror movies. It was my mom telling me about these horribly scary movies that she saw when she was growing up, like Night of the Living Dead or Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
And so I sort of grew up with those, and I remember, not that this is that old, but well, I mean, it is old now, but Monty Python's Holy Grail was a big one. So like the humor that I was introduced to as a young child was, again, older humor. But yeah, the Fleischer Supermans were something I was introduced to very early. So even my, comic reading was sort of inspired by the 1940s. So it's like, everything was just older. There was more there to mine than just, what was happening around me in the 90s.
Yeah, that's probably for the best. The 90s came back, but I was there, and I can guarantee all the 90s revival people, it wasn't that great. It wasn't that great.
Well, I keep seeing kids now wearing things that were like around like the Y2K era, and I'm like, is that something we want to bring back? But
Yeah. Are you sure about this?
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's every person growing up does something and dresses in a way that is completely regrettable later in life. It's a rite of passage.
yeah.
I'd like to talk about your style, because you're progressing with these same characters and you're working in the same universe, but now you are exploring different time periods. Like you said, with the
Hmm.
second volume, you're sort of taking us back to a remembered event and
Hmm.
connecting it to our characters' current lives. When you move from different time periods, or you move to different sort of chapters in the same universe, does your style or your process change at all?
I mean, in certain ways, yeah. I don't think that it's something that I think about.
Mhm.
It's more instinctual as you're sort of just writing and just letting these things flow. I mean, you definitely know that jumping back 40 years, Joe Bob will not have experienced some of the things that I already know that he's going to experience.
Mhm.
Like, for example, in the first issue, we mentioned that the sheriff who's in the dream sequence, who we see in the 1981 arc alive, we
Yeah,
find out that he's been shot in the first issue.
yeah,
And we know that Joe Bob shot his brother, who shot him. So we know that this will happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
yeah,
So we're seeing a much more innocent time period, and a much more, for them at least, and a much more innocent Joe Bob. Um, And so that is kind of an interesting thing to work out and to write and try to figure out, how does he interact with things that he would interact with differently as he's older. And obviously, as his body is more creaky and he's got more bones. And but yeah, that I don't really approach it differently per se, but I'm sure that it's there, that how I approach it. But I mean, I guess I like to read the dialogue out loud when I write it, to
Yeah,
see if it sounds good.
natural.
Yeah, just to see if if it works for me, then it probably will work for other people, and it sounds like it has been, so that's good. But yeah, they basically the way that I read Joe Bob when he's younger is different than when he's older,
Yeah,
and that's something very small, but it helps me in the writing of it, I guess.
yeah. Have you found writing Joe Bob in these different time periods? Have you ever been scripting something or writing dialogue and found that you may have had him say something or do something or act in a way that you unintentionally were giving him future motivations that you then had to kind of walk back, or how do you navigate it and keep that straight, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything in particular that has happened like that, but I mean, it's definitely a conscious thing to know that he's a different person when he's older. I think that he's much more reserved when he's older. I think that he's more talkative when he's younger. Although literally in the 81 arc, he's literally just talking to somebody the whole time. So I guess he is very talkative. But he's much more lived in when he's older.
Mhm.
Obviously, but it definitely comes across as I'm writing him. And in the not to talk about the new arc, but in the new arc that I'm writing for next year, it's again, we're going to be in the past, but it's going to be in the 90s. Yay, 90s.
Yay.
So some of the things that didn't happen in 1981 have now happened. And so he's a much more remorseful person and a much more haunted person.
Yeah.
And so we're starting to see the person that he's going to become in the modern day.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to sort of think about it in that way, but it all just I don't know. I took acting in high school and stuff like that, so it always kind of was just like in the back of my mind to sort of just kind of get into the mind of whoever it is that you're writing.
Yeah.
So I don't think it overlaps too much, and if it has, it may still be in there. I may have written something for old Joe Bob, and it's young Joe Bob saying it. So,
Look for unintentional Easter eggs, readers. Mentioning that you studied acting. We also were speaking with Jeremy Holt a little bit earlier, and they had mentioned that they have a background in film school as well. And we were discussing how that is surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, depending on your perspective, common in the comics industry to find people who have, if not gone to film school or studied acting professionally, have at least sort of in an autodidactic manner taken some of those skills and brought them to the comics medium. Do you feel like your background with acting influences the way you write in any other way besides the way you said you handle dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, I had always really been writing from a very early age. And in fact, since this is LibraryCon, one of the first things I had actually written was for a workshop at my local library.
Shout out.
But yeah, so writing was always on my mind. And in fact, the whole reason I got into the acting classes in high school was that I wanted to write and direct. And that was really what I wanted to do. And I saw the acting, well, they didn't have a film class, first of all, but they had these acting classes. And I figured that maybe I could convince the teacher to let me write, and direct the actors in the class.
Yeah.
Which they did, but they also, I had to act because that was the class. So I did have to act, but I feel like that helps me learn just so much about just inhabiting the mind of a character and figuring out little quirks, like and that's one of the things that I think people really like about our book is the small moments And those were the things that I always picked up on that helped make a character real to me. Just in something with, if a character just repetitively like scratches at a table or something like that, why are they doing that? And, sort of just figuring out what their mindset is. So I definitely think that writing, acting definitely helps influence my writing in some ways. But yeah, it was the writing that led me to the acting in the first place.
Yeah. I love this tangled web of film and comics and writing and acting. And
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that comics are like this perfect in between medium between film and TV and prose, right?
yeah,
So it's like it's this perfectly visual medium. I don't know. I love it. It's not quite, the full sensory experience that film or TV is,
yeah.
but it's still got that literary sort of merit that a novel has. I don't know. I really love the medium. I've always loved the medium. I've always loved comics. So it
Yeah.
wasn't too much of a step away to get involved in comics.
Yeah, I think that you're right, it is this perfect little mix of literary and film, because you're engaging your audience's mind to sort of fill in what you would be showing them in a film, right? But you're still
Yeah.
showing them a little bit more than you would be in a non-graphic, in fiction. So it's a
Mhm.
really interesting mix, how you'll show a little bit and then use the audience's imagination to fill in stuff that's in the gutters and etc.
Mhm.
But I think you're right. One of the when you mentioned that, it's the small moments, and these little small human moments, they're really important to the way your story progresses. And I think it's a really interesting way to tackle weird things or dark things or humor or other themes.
Mhm.
But we're always coming back to Joe Bob and just what is he thinking, and what is, how is this affecting his life, and why did he go to
Yeah.
get a casserole dish?
The casserole dish. Actually, if people want to pick up issue 13, there's a recipe for the casserole in it. But
That's
just a little
fantastic.
reveal there for you. Which I actually, so I think I mentioned before, I was in Texas because there's a family that I know that's from Texas, and I actually reached out to the mom and was like, what's like a very Texas casserole? And she gave me like a list of what the Texas casseroles would be.
Oh my God, I love
Um,
this.
but yeah, I mean, the small moments for me, that's what character is, right? I mean, those are the things that really unlock a person and let you see who they are.
Yeah.
And just, I mean, you can, a person can be 80, like for my dad,
Oh,
but I see things and I've observed him over the years that I sort of understand him as a human being just through observation. The
yeah.
little things, how he interacts with certain people, how he does certain things. So that's definitely, yeah, for me, that's an important part of her book. And definitely an important part of how I write characters. So
Yeah. When you are writing the characters, when you're preparing this to go from idea to the finished page, you're working with other creators. This is a collaborative
mhm.
process. How do you go about communicating with the rest of your team? Are you very hands-on? Are you very involved? Do you like to throw out loose ideas for page and panel layout and let your collaborators sort of take the reins? What's your style?
There goes my dog. Um, yeah. So Jacob is my sole collaborator. Which he has a color assistant as well, who's finally going to be credited on issue 13, I think.
Right.
And she's fantastic. But basically, I'm pretty specific in my breakdowns of what the page is going to be, and then specifically what the panel is going to be. In terms of even just what the angle is going to be. So I essentially, in my mind, to sort of direct what the page is going to look like, right?
Mhm.
So I break it down into reverse shots and close-ups and all that. But Jacob knows, and I've said this to him. I used to write it on the scripts, and I just stopped doing it because I think that he understood that what I write in the script is black and white, and really he's going to bring it all to life. So what I say is just a roadmap. He doesn't necessarily have to take the roads that I'm saying, as long as they get us to the same place.
Yeah.
So I often kind of think of it as like, I write the first draft, he writes the second draft, and then we come back together again when we're putting it all together, and we're both editing and all that. But yeah, he generally follows the roadmap that I give him. But if something works better, even just in terms of him drawing, if he's like not getting the angle right, he'll change it, and it will work 10 times better, 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
10 times out of 10, really. I don't think I've ever really corrected anything he's done. Which has been it's been a fantastic collaboration. But yeah, I think that part of it is just that we both really understand each other's style and what we do, and I think that that's a big part of it, is that we don't tend to undo what the other person has done. What we do tends to elevate what the other person has done, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's the key to good collaboration, is not, you don't step on the other person's work. You find a way to, you yes and what they're doing.
Yeah.
If librarians wanted to place that Texas Blood in a book display or give a reader's recommendation to their patrons, what would you say, what would you want to be on the shelf with them? What companion pieces or read-alike titles would you recommend to go with your book? And it doesn't have to be comic books. It could be, it can be a comic book, graphic novel, fiction, nonfiction. You can even delve into film if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, for me, in terms of comics, I think that the big ones are, the Darwin Cook Parker series. I think that that's a fantastic series and was definitely a big influence on me, whether it's clear or not. I mean, his work with characters in those books are fantastic. I think that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips' Criminal series is fantastic and definitely a big influence on us. Obviously, because Sean Phillips is Jacob Phillips' father, but also because they're just great crime stories. And then I definitely think that one of the biggest influences for me, especially on the first arc, was Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett. Jim Thompson's work, especially Pop 1280, The Killer Inside Me, which was also a big influence on issue 13, which is coming in December again. Cormac McCarthy, of course. I think that that's one of the things that people always bring up is No Country for Old Men, which I'm glad that people, the fact that people compare us to something as great as that is really nice, know.
It's an apt comparison. It really is, for anybody who hasn't read the books. It really is an apt comparison. So I will also say that thankfully, your book has never filled me with such existential sadness that I just wanted to like lay down and die. And Cormac McCarthy frequently leaves me a husky being.
Well, Blood Meridian is the book to read if you want to feel bad.
Yeah.
There's some stuff in that book that I just read and was like, Jesus, I don't know if I can keep reading this book now. But I did, and it is a really great book.
You just have to have a therapy appointment booked afterwards.
Yeah, we have dark stuff in our book, but whew, is he something else?
Yeah, he takes the cake. He's working something out on the page there, is what I think.
Yeah.
I also want to make sure, we're sadly running a little bit short on time, but I wanted to ask the audience if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask Chris. You can go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'm more than happy to read them out. We'd love to hear what you think, what you're curious about. And in the meantime, while people are thinking of their questions, I also, Chris, want to give you a chance to let people know where they can find you outside of the conference. So when we're not chatting here, where can people follow you and find out more about your work?
Well, I'm on both Twitter and Instagram. The name for those are the same, which is at Christoph Condon. And the reason for that is that my New Jersey state license growing up couldn't fit my whole name, Christopher. So it's Christopher without the ER, Condon. That's my tag. Jacob and I also have a Patreon. a joint Patreon. So it's patreon.com/Condon Phillips. If you want to add to my workload, you can become a $6 or $10 tier member, and I will write you a typewritten letter and sign it. And that's what I do every month. I write like 30 of these letters and send them out to people. It takes like 3 days. But I type.
Typewriter?
Yeah, my mom's old type. Like I said,
Oh my
older
God.
parent. So yeah, I type out letters, individual letters. That I usually have like a thing that I'm writing in general. So
Yeah.
everybody gets like a close letter, but they're all unique. I don't go with a template.
That's fantastic.
So, it's a fun thing to write. I know that if I was a reader, I would like it, which is really the way that I approach things, is that if I was a reader, what would I think? So that's kind of what I do. And I know that, like I said, I would like it if a writer did that. So
yeah, I think that's amazing. I love ephemera, and I think that librarians also are very big on adding ephemera to their collections.
yeah.
We have a question from Aaron Benson. Thank you so much, Aaron. They would like to know, what did you read growing up that made you want to do comics?
What did I read growing up that made me want to do comics? Movies definitely helped me gravitate towards comics in the first place, because one of the first movies I've ever saw was Batman, the '89 movie. My brother and I were just obsessed with that movie growing up. Even just the music, we used to just put on the title sequence and we would like march with our Batman capes on, because we were very cool.
Fantastic. The coolest.
But yeah, I read the first Batman movies again were probably the reason that I found comics in the first place. My parents didn't read comics. I found them on my own. And the first comics I remember ever having were in conjunction with the release of Batman and Robin, which maybe not the greatest Batman movie, but at Toys R Us, when you went there during that season when that movie was coming out, they give you the first appearance of Batgirl, the first appearance of Mr. Freeze, and the first appearance of it might have been Poison Ivy.
Yeah.
And they would just give you those comics as comps, basically, if you bought something at Toys R Us. So that was my first introduction to comics, really, were these old Batman comics. And so I was always very much obsessed with Batman, and Batman comics were some of the first that I read, and then sort of grew out from there.
Yeah.
Hellboy, BPRD were some of the first books that I branched out with. Yeah.
A similar dark aesthetic to Batman. I mean, I think it's a logical choice to move together. Yeah.
Yeah, very gothic and
super spooky.
Yeah, I'm into the spooky stuff, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah, same, which I'm sure shocks everyone in this audience. Yeah.
Well, I do have my brightly colored Creature from the Black Lagoon on the wall there, if you can see him.
Oh, it's so cool.
He's fun over there, Gil.
Yeah. Did you commission that, or is that a poster that you purchased, or a print?
So this was actually Scott Morris, who's a animator at Pixar. He was doing these paintings, and he basically did a bidding war on Instagram. Whoever bid the most could get it, and I happened to bid the most. It wasn't that much, but it was. I mean, I really loved the piece, and I really thought it was cool. So yeah. I'm glad that I have it. But yeah, would I commission? Sure, but it was the luck of being on Instagram at the right time.
Yeah. Once again, the internet has done one good thing.
Yeah. Done a couple. So
before we disband our discussion, I also wanted to ask you one last question.
Sure.
Are you open to doing library programs and virtual chats? And if so, how could librarians reach out to set those up?
Absolutely. I'm absolutely open to that. Like I said before, I mean, libraries were, I guess they kind of started my career in a way, because that first book that I published at the workshop when I was 6 or 7, libraries have been a very important part of my life. So I'd definitely be interested. And if anybody needs to reach me, they can email me. My email is ccondon18@gmail.com.
You can also reach out through Image Comics, and we'll be happy to connect.
Or
you.
Image Comics. Yes, that I'm very open to doing that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate you making the time to talk with us today.
Absolutely. Thank
All right,
you.
well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to set you free now, and I'll see you hopefully for our next chat. And don't forget to let your colleagues know if they were unable to make this discussion, that we're going to have this recorded and archived both within the environment and on YouTube. So if you missed the chat with Chris, let them know that they can catch it again. Thanks, guys. All right, have a good day. Bye.